Mankind was a species adamant in keeping their armed forces be the best they could be, regardless of what any other species thinks, and regardless of the absence of threats to their existence. To the point where they were called as being unnecessarily paranoid by some of the more peace-minded species council members. They have an extensive and intensive military-industrial complex that, even during times of peace, will produce and upgrade the weapons of war humanity has mastered since its early days before their space age, from their fearsome fleets with ships armed to the teeth with various ship-grade weaponry and defensive arrays, to their most basic infantrymen, clad in power armor and armed with equally various handheld weaponry. Humanity has an arsenal capable of wreaking destruction upon their non-existent enemies. Not to mention the infrastructure required for such a war machine. They have a logistics chain ready for when war ever breaks out to supply and maintain their war gear, and they have an extensive intelligence network designed around the need for an early warning system, as well as maintaining a distinct advantage to their armed forces strategically. Even their economy has a war setting, which would allow them to keep their troops supplied and ready for their as of yet determined opposition in the event of a siege or assault. A good deal of the Galactic Alliance were not enthused at this galactic twitchy trigger finger the humans seem to have with the doves, as the humans refer to the more peace-minded council members, advocating for mankind to demilitarize itself out of both fear and exasperation. But humanity never once rested their guns down, and it kept a long vigil for anyone that ever tried to fight a war against them. And since humanity was a neutral and independent party amongst the galactic community, the Alliance relented and allowed the paranoid species to keep their vigilance, even when it seemed the galaxy had no enemies for them to point their weapons at. Seemed. Because after a measly 10 years of living with humanity, the Galactic Alliance finds itself at the forefront of a war against another coalition of species, one as bloodthirsty and trigger-happy as they initially thought humanity was. The Uravel Empire surprised the Alliance when their research vessel encountered them, shocked them when news of the vessel being destroyed was received, and horrified them when the system they were found in was soon under attack, with mass reports of growing casualties of both military and civilian kind. The Alliance quickly assembled their defense forces for a mad dash to stop the Uravel's advance in its tracks, having put together what might possibly be the first full-blown fleet with the appropriate army accompanying it, and sent them forth to put the Empire's march to a halt. Unfortunately, the Empire had found the perfect playground for its own troops, and soon its war machine was pointed towards the Alliance fully. The defensive fleet was battered down to the last ship, with casualties reported and unreported happening, and the Alliance soon finds themselves facing an opponent that might very well take it down entirely after so many years of prosperity. In a desperate bid to stall their own fall, the Alliance propped up whatever forces they could muster to slow the march of Uravel forces that preyed upon their people. Divisions and armies were drafted and trained quickly to contest and defend the worlds under attack from the invaders' own troops, and fleets and ships were built and formed to contest for orbital supremacy. But it soon became a losing battle on all fronts, strained by this sudden need to defend itself. The Alliance were quickly scraping the barrel to do whatever it took to stop the invading menace. It wasn't until the Uravel Empire was mere steps away from the core systems did salvation arrive for the Alliance. Salvation in the form of humanity's own war machine. What had been a steady advance into their core systems, stalled only by their desperate attempts and fleets, soon came to a screeching halt when humanity warped in their own fleets and armies to the Alliance's front yard. What should have been a massacre ground to a contested conflict that saw both Uravel forces and humanity's forces fighting tooth and nail to push each other back, with the Alliance providing whatever aid they could give for their allied war machine. Defensive lines were formed and stabilized, as humanity put their seemingly entire war effort into stopping the Empire's advance into Alliance systems, and logistics chains were created to ensure this line of guns and ships never faltered against the enemies. Humanity's fleets of carriers and escort carriers warped in with their escorts consisting of cruisers, frigates and corvettes to provide an iron wall that protected the Alliance behind it, with masses of soldiers and pilots and non-combat personnel to man the defense of what would be called the Fortress Systems. And as the lines formed and held, humanity came to the Alliance's aid in the form of something they called land lease for their armed forces and humanitarian aid for the war refugees, with the influx of war material and the economy behind it provided by mankind. The Alliance armed forces soon finds its footing yet again and began to rebuild itself to fight the menace to their existence with their stalwart ally. And with intergalactic aid coming from the civilian district of mankind, the Alliance's many displaced citizens soon find themselves properly treated, fed and housed, and even allowed the opportunity to help the war effort in some other way. Soon, the Alliance was given the opportunity to regain their breathing, with humanity bearing the brunt of the Uraval Empire's assault, until they managed to get their feet up. And what had been a dire situation for the Alliance was turned into one of hope, when the Uraval Empire was unable to penetrate through the defensive lines as they rebuilt themselves. With arms and armor that was born from countless battles and wars, humanity's armed forces, and the Alliance armed forces took on and dealt equally savage blows to the Uraval Empire's armies, and with ships created with the experience of an absurd amount of conflicts, mankind and the Alliance battered, there and ground down the Empire's own ships, as they attempted to push through the fortress erected by them. The Terran's fleets was something else. If you aren't seeing their smaller ships firing their cannons, sending out missiles and knocking out fighter crafts and missiles out of the void, you'll be seeing their carriers provide long-range firepower, while their fighter air-wings become a screen of PDWs, missiles and electronic warfare systems that mess up the Uraval's own ships that pass through them. Captain Nadama Balas, recounting the void battle above an Alliance world. Seeing human soldiers charge onto a Uraval slaughter squad, meeting their savage glee with their own fury before they died as they covered our retreat, was a sight I couldn't forget. Not when the slaughter squad seemed stunned, maybe even a little scared, as someone even crazier than them. Knight Sergeant Drakas Var of the 7th Bulwark Legion, on account of his squad's retreat with the Terran's remaining soldiers from the 7th Army Guard unit. Human pilots are nothing if not crazy. A AA screen covering over one of our men's position? Through heaven and hell, as they said, they gave those men the support they needed to push through the Uran's lines. Captain Frag Tor Gala of the 12th Army, witnessing human fixed air providing them with much needed air support. And when the assault ground to a full halt, when the Uraval Empire could not sustain their advance and the defensive lines were stable and strong, the Alliance soon learned that the fleets and men that came to the raid were nothing but QFRs. Quick Reactionary Forces. Forces that were always on standby for any invasion or assault that's meant to stall the enemy until the true offensive fleets were mobilized. When the counteroffensive began, the Alliance bore the sight of the humans' full might in all its fearsome glory. The escort ships, if they could even be called escort ships at all, walked in first of the Krillian system ahead of their capital ships. Stealth riggers and heavy destroyers formed hunter packs with batteries and missile pods brimmed across their shielded and armored surfaces, and heavy cruisers soon came after with their spinal cannons and much larger defensive arrays. Then their supercarriers walked in, and Alliance forces had noted that it was a spectacle to see such large ships, dwarfing most of their escorts in their sheer size. Brimming with many fighter air wings of both manned and unmanned variety, which has an extensive array of weapons to employ, with an even more extensive network of gun batteries, missile pods and PDWs across their surfaces, and coupled with powerful spinal cannons, most of the Alliance's military were unable to comprehend just how the humans managed to construct and maintain such ships. And that wasn't accounting for the other ships that joined in, particularly their ground forces ships, assault carriers carrying entire marine divisions with relevant armor, strike craft and transport, followed in closely with the supercarriers, and screened further by corvettes and frigates responsible for keeping their carriers safe and to provide orbital support for the marines. Along with them are logistical ships meant to support the fleet on total, repair and rearm ships, medical ships, and the ever-elusive intelligence ships that would provide strategic knowledge over the war. It was then the counteroffensive began, as it was there did humanity showed just how ready they were to fight a war. As the fleets began pushing the Uraval Empire back from the Alliance core systems, retaking world after ravished world and system after despoiled system, the utter efficiency and effectiveness human waged war became apparent. Once the fleets were engaged, the supercarriers would begin sending out their fighter crafts by the dozens. Scores of manned fighters accompanied by unmanned ones would form up and provide a razor wall of lethal wounds and potential death with anti-fighter and anti-ship munitions, and all assisted and covered by electronic support crafts that provided much needed survivability for them. Behind them would be the escort ships, and they provide the heavy firepower needed when the fighter craft weren't enough. Energy bolts, missiles and projectiles would be slung across the void, and for every return fire received, their shields, armor and point defense array were more than enough to protect them. When orbital supremacy was achieved over a planet, the ground forces fleets would swoop into orbit and begin eliminating the enemy ground defenses as well. Corvettes and frigates would tread between void and atmosphere to begin orbital bombardment of known military targets, and the assault carriers would deploy transports and strike craft to clean out resistance where orbital weaponry were dangerous to use. Even the ground troops were given the most support for this endeavour, including the typical arm support of tanks and heavy mechs. The human Marines would utilize artillery of all flavor, and air support of both fixed-wing and VTOL kind to maximum effect in addition, leaving no chance for the enemy to survive encounters with them. Well supplied with the most updated intel and the most comprehensive logistical chain that provided for the men and women of the counter-offensive. And one by one, humanity and the Alliance pushed back the Uraval Empire, up until they reached the initial border of Alliance space. Here, the Alliance Council members pulled in the reins to their armies and navies, and formed a thick line of guns and armor and ships to never again be forced into a situation of desperation, like in the early phase of the war. Here, both Alliance and humanity began rebuilding the ravished worlds left behind by the Uraval Empire, and extensive aid was given to the traumatized populace that had been unfortunately left to fend for themselves when the initial defense forces fell. Assisted by humanity's war machine, the Alliance was able to keep their borders up and made it into a meat grinder that had the Uraval Empire throwing more and more of their own forces into it to break it once more. Soon the roles were reversed, and suddenly the Empire was on the back foot as it attempted to push the joint defensive line. And though the Alliance was mostly rebuilding their economy and infrastructure, though the general populace was allowed their homes again, humanity went forth to push back the Uraval imperialists further into their own territory, with some of the Alliance's own fleets joining in after receiving permission. They pushed the coalition back into each of the collective's home systems and surrounded them individually, and with each of the integral war species cut off from the Empire, their armies dwindled in capabilities. Until finally, a message was received from them. A message of empty threats and hidden surrender. It was noted that when the Alliance and humanity sent in their diplomats to speak with the Empire's own, the various species responsible and represented the Empire looked uncomfortable, sitting with them entirely. I don't think they've ever been forced into this situation. I don't even think any of them thought this would have happened. But here they were, and I don't think they like it. Ambassador Alex Torres. And after brokering a treaty, the Alliance was then surprised when humanity offered aid to the defeated enemy. After seeing the way the human war machine worked, after witnessing how they battled and warred, seeing them offer an olive branch towards the enemy was by far the most absurd thing for the Alliance. And as years went by, as the war machine winds down and the economy began to recover, the Alliance witnessed what could be only described as a miracle, as the species comprising the Uraval Empire were re-educated and rehabilitated into members of a society that could be reasoned and lived with. In its place, the UN Coalition was formed, and the Alliance and humanity enjoyed a galactic society with this third party. It was around this formation did the Alliance finally inquire with humanity upon its stance in the galaxy. You confuse us greatly, Ambassador. Councilwoman Thera grumbled as she leaned back on her seat, her talons rubbing the area just before her beak to ease the slowly forming migraine she felt. Alex just smiled in empathy at her words, and quipped snidely with humour in his tone. Least you don't have to deal with us on a daily basis. His colleague elbowed his side roughly, and the brown-haired man grunted in pain before giving Yvonne a look, which had zero effect on her as she stared flatly at him through her glasses. One of the council members, an insectoid male that looked vaguely Beetle-inspired, huffed at the casual display of annoyance, and gave his own avian colleague a look before leaning forward and stipling his claws together on the table, his vibrating voice near harmonic as he added his own words to the discussion. Much as I find it amusing, I agree with Councillor Thera. Humanity has since showed itself capable of both war and peace, time duty, with remarkable efficiency on both ends, and for once we'd like to have a definite answer as to how it's even possible. The U-shaped table allowed all the Alliance's council members to look at each other, and the person of interest equally, and so when the council members spoke the question at the duo of humans that sat before the U-shaped table, all of them leaned forward to hear them explain themselves. Both Alex and Yvonne gave each other a look when they heard the question, one stern but conflicted, and one casual but resigned, and eventually the blonde ambassador put her datapad down and stapled her fingers together before leaning back, allowing Alex to take centre stage of their attention. Feeling eyes all on him, the ambassador turned to face the council with a pensive look on him, his lips thin as he pressed them together, and he splayed his hands on the table firmly as he righted himself in his chair. Then he opened his mouth, ready to speak, but no words came out. For a few moments, the brunette ambassador moved his lips awkwardly as he tried to articulate sentences to explain how the human mind generally looked at war and peace, finding himself throwing words after words away because they were too complex, philosophical, and just outright long, until he felt a hand firmly squeeze his shoulder, Yvonne having provided her support for whatever he chose to speak about. It was enough for him to shut his mouth up, and had him taken in a deep breath as he considered the most basic way of humanity's stance in war and peace. He finally found the most proper way to explain. What would you feel after having been bullied? There was silence amongst the council members, as they carefully processed his words, and then a feline council member spoke up with clear confusion in his tone. Pardon? Alex shifted his eyes towards the council member, giving him a heavy glance, and repeated his question. What do you feel after being beaten down, harassed, and generally exploited by someone? Do you feel like you wanted them to stop at any means necessary? Maybe roll over and beg for your life? Give them some sort of sacrifice to appease them? He added carefully, slowly, so as to frame his words as intellectual questions. Or maybe you fight back, and beat them up as hard as they beat you up to make sure they never beat you up again. He finished his question, eyeing each and every council member carefully to gauge their reactions. Some looked conflicted, others looked thoughtful, and a few looked somber. Seeing the general reactions, the human ambassador then leaned forward, face still neutral but now possessing a hint of sternness to it, and gave his answer to his own question. Humanity had a lot of bullies in his time growing up, a lot of men and women who thought they could push around others for their own gains, and usually they'd never last long because the people had enough of their bullshit. Some even clawed their way into leadership roles, and drove their country into the ground because they wanted more than what they had, and so invaded others to expand their personal dream of a dictatorship, with them at the top. And because of people like this existing, we could never really get ourselves to relax one bit, in case of people like them managing to rise up the ranks. And so long as people can think freely, so long as they can have their own opinions and outlooks, there's always a chance someone would think they deserve better, or no one does. Yvonne was now looking down, keeping herself uncharacteristically quiet, and Alex simply had a long look on his features as he recounted the bloody history of mankind, with a simple analogy to better be understood. Even the council members all looked at each other, after the ambassador's question in silence, regarding their own species' history. Blinking, the brunette then focused his eyes back, and he sat up straight again before finishing his answer with a small smile. So, you can call our attitude an unfortunate necessity if you want, because we've seen enough of this in our own people. Finally gotten their answer, the Alliance Council remained silent, as the human ambassadors cleaned up their desk. They left the council with a lot to consider.